should leave your camera on. Okay, not you.
And Katie.
We know you like to be a troublemaker, but you can't disappear on us at the beginning. So thank you everybody for coming to talk to us today. We are so excited. My name is Clevis Natera, and I am one of the co-founding members of Love as a Kind of Cure. This is our second virtual festival, and we are together this week to dismantle racism and prejudice. And when Mahohodi and I were talking about putting together the week of events, we knew that, you know, talking to our sisters across the boundaries of countries and nations and race was a critical conversation, because you can't really dismantle anything without women in the room. I mean, that's the truth. So today we have this illustrious panel. We have Sisonke Msimang. How do I pronounce your last name, sweetie?
Msimang.
Msimang. This is what we're practicing today, asking respectful questions and getting it right. So Sisonke Msimang, who is a South African feminist, a TED speaker, and the author of 2 wonderful books. We also have Katie Sturino, who is a body positivity feminist and Mega Babe founder. Our third panelist is Mona Eltahawy, who is an Egyptian feminist and an author, and she seems to be stuck in outer space. I don't know where she is. So we're hoping she'll join us before the end of this conversation. In terms of what you should expect for today, the conversation is really trying to gather these intelligent and incredibly smart women to talk to us about, you know, what are the kinds of challenges that we face as women, both in solidarity and in terms of standing up for each other, but also just in our own personal lives. Like, what are the obstacles that get in the way of doing that? Some we know are systemic, and some are also involving more personal work. So for today, we really want to just get into the nitty-gritty. Mahohodi and I are both very committed to the idea that each of these sessions is the beginning of a conversation that is a commitment for lifelong work. So what we hope you all will understand is that, you know, we're going to give you resources and next steps to do at the end of the conversation, and that we encourage you to take those steps, because today should be a beginning really of a lifelong conversation. Mahohodi?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know people are either in the middle of lunch in New York, or like Sisonke Msimang, and a couple of other people who are with us in Australia. It's midnight, so thank you for being with us and taking out the time. I think it would be great to just immediately get into it. I mean, we've done a beautiful job introducing our speakers. And if I can ask everybody who's on the call, hi Irene, I see you. That's my mother-in-law, everyone. Could you please kindly, if you're not a speaker, mute your phone and your audio as well, please. Thank you. So I'd like to get right into it by inviting Katie to share with us a little bit about, especially as a white woman, how do you understand intersectional feminism, and what does it mean for you, this moment that we're living in, navigating so much that is about, you know, what you already stand for through your brand and also through your own personhood as a body positive feminist and as a feminist, full stop. And Black Lives Matter. How have you made sense of this moment?
I'm laughing because I feel the least qualified in this room to talk.
Asked me not to ask her first, so.
I know. So pardon me for probably my awkward intro, but it's been a really eye-opening and awkward, painful, embarrassing time, I think, to be a white woman with a platform. Like, I will just say that. I think that there's been so much where you think you've been an ally, you think you've been doing something, and then you look and you ask and you haven't been. And I think that that's something that so many women are going through, right? So many white women are going through right now. And I think that that is that has been painful for Black women in our lives, to be like, oh, you like didn't get it, you didn't understand this already. So I think that has been a very hard thing to navigate. The movement, the Black Lives Matter movement is so important, and it's so important to me personally. And I'm so happy that there's actual. Oh, I cut out for a second.
It's still here.
Okay. I'm so happy that there's actual movement on it. One of the things that I see happening on social media right now between women with the Black Lives Matter movement is that there seems to be a lot of noise and infighting between women. And I think that is because people don't necessarily understand intersectional feminism, right? Like, they don't understand that just because you do one thing doesn't mean you support someone else. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave it there because that's my opener, and it's probably not clear, but I will happily jump back in when any of you smarter people say something else.
You know, and let me just say one thing. Welcome, Mona. We're glad you made it through. We're so happy. We just got started, so you haven't missed much. But you know, Katie, one thing that I want to say is that I'm really grateful for your and Ruth, can I ask you to please turn your video off, just so that the speakers are the ones on the screen? We appreciate it. Thank you. But you know, Katie, I'm so appreciative of your comments because, you know, one of the things that we know can be really challenging in this, it's supercharged, this environment. And we know that, you know, you're taken to the mat for not speaking, you're taken to the mat for saying the wrong thing, you're taken to the mat for trying to say something, but you know, part of this conversation is really the fact that like silence is not an option. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to speak up. And so even if it means that you have to, you know, even if it means that you might make a mistake and say the wrong thing, is you still have to find that path. So I just want to like really thank you for starting being so vulnerable, because it's really difficult to engage in these conversations. And I see that across every aspect of my life, you know, where like I see white women really struggling. So thank you for that.
Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for having me.
So we're gonna go now. Sisonke, are you ready?
You threw me out there first.
Thank you, Katie. You see what solidarity looks like? This is what solidarity looks like. Solidarity looks like a Black woman saying, I am tired. It is midnight. I have been on another call and on back-to-back meetings for the last few days, and my mind is not fully able to engage until I hear someone else speak. So thank you for that. Hey everybody, it's wonderful to be talking to you everywhere where you are around the world. You know, it's I was very excited about this opportunity. So thank you too for the invitation. And part of why I was excited to have this conversation is because unless we are given a moment within which to think about something in a very clear and consistent way, what often happens is that we are overwhelmed by what is happening, right? And so we may process it by talking to our friends and family, but it's not the same thing as adding a kind of level of intellectual rigor, which these kind of spaces provide us with, and an opportunity to be challenged by the thinking of others. So I really do appreciate this time. It is also a time when I'm very aware that people are in various situations of lockdown. It is one of the few times in which our sisters in America are living in a very similar situation to those of us around the world. There has never been a time in my life where everybody is going through the exact same thing at the same time. And so it is a kind of remarkable thing to comment on. And there has never been a time in my life when a public health emergency has an equal effect no matter how rich or poor your country is, at least for the moment. I think we are beginning to see the ways in which we are departing from that, where everywhere except America, the quality of your public health system is, of course, going to determine your mortality. But certainly in America, I think it's one of the times when we can offer some level of solidarity in which there's a sense of shared empathy, because it is a very bad situation that has been brought about by incredibly terrible leadership. And many of us around the world know exactly what that feels like. So, so my heart goes out to many of you living in the US, and of course in Brazil and in South Africa and in many other parts of the world where COVID is affecting us. I think the heightened state of isolation for those of us who do not live in the United States has meant that watching Black Lives Matter's protests through the prism of distance, but also an intense onlineness, has added a level of kind of viscerality to the experience. And I hope we get a chance to kind of reflect on what that means, to be glued to media, to be invested, not just in our own lives, as we of course are, but also invested in something that is happening in real time in another part of the world, because we are seeing it unfold. I think there's a lot to think about in that sense. But those are just kind of prefacing comments. I think for me, you know, a lot of what I have greeted this moment with is a combination of cynicism and hope. And I'm as skeptical as anyone else in this, you know, in this room about the notion of hope. So we can talk about that a little bit. And curiosity and awe. So that's, I sort of swing wildly between those things. So let's talk about them, you know, bit by bit. So I think the cynicism is, of course, for those of us who have been committed to racial justice, to anti-Black racism and to anti-racism in general for all of our lives, to meet this moment where suddenly people are becoming awake. You know, I have a friend, I've been referring to it cynically as the Great White Awakening. And it's lovely. It's lovely to see white people awakening, but there's something kind of cynical and skeptical about this moment, you know, in this moment. And part of my fear in this moment, and part of what cynicism is an attempt to protect ourselves, to guard ourselves against the inevitability of failure, right? That's what it is to be cynical. And so part of my cynicism about this moment is this notion that when you come to realize something, you either have to address it, or having seen it, you wish to run away from it. And my cynicism is that the backlash that comes when people realize that people have been racialized for a very long time and subjected to many, many things. And when people realize that their privilege has had absolute consequences, and when people realize that there is an onus on them to act, the backlash that comes with not acting, I think, is a significant one that we have to be able to grapple with. So I greet this moment with, on the one hand, significant cynicism and skepticism. And I will say that that is a protective measure, but I think one that is born out of experience. Of course, I greet it also with hope, with this sense that never before in my life have I seen so many white people coalesce around a set of ideas that is so commonplace and accepted amongst those of us who happen to be Black and brown people around the world. This is something to be noted. It is something that is that we ought not to take for granted. It is the result of many, many years of hard work. It did not just happen because of Instagram. And so there is something incredibly hopeful in that. And I want to be clear that my sense of hope in this moment is not necessarily about a hope in a segment of humanity that we call white people. The sense of hope that I have is that there is merit and value in doing hard work over a long period of time, and that people are able to change if we do the work. So the sense of hope I have is seeing things come to fruition. This is a moment of fruition, and I like to think about it as a moment of fruition rather than a moment of awakening, because fruition means seeds were planted and now they come. Whereas awakening is like people were sleeping and suddenly awake. A lot of people have been wide awake and planting seeds. And I think that distinction is actually an important one. And then, you know, the last thing I'll say is that I greet this moment with curiosity and awe, and I think it's important to be observant at this time. I think any woman who is serious about about upending the patriarchy, and I know Mona will talk about that more, must also be paying close attention to the ways in which openings also signify ruptures, but they also signify potential avenues of closing. So how is space being closed even as it's being open? I'm fascinated to see that, and I think curiosity is the best way to see it, rather than what I talked about at the beginning, which is cynicism, because curiosity means you're open to observation. And awe, which is linked to curiosity, at this generation of younger women than myself, I'm in my 40s now.
I don't believe it.
You mean 40s, right?
Yeah, we won't talk about which part of the 40s in which I'm living. But anyway, but being in my 40s now and having a long eye back and being able to see these young women who are just refusing to accept a way of being in the world that is half measures, the tactical kind of invisible organizing that many of us had to come up doing. Young women of this generation are simply not interested in, and I see that with so much awe and so much, I'm inspired by it. So that's how I'm greeting this moment, and we can talk in a bit more detail, as we go on.
Great.
Love it. Thank you. Love it, love it, love it. Mona, welcome. So wonderful to have you on the call. And I'm wondering if, you could jump in, and I just want to highlight something that I think is often problematic that we do when we have conversations around race, and especially as feminists, when we talk about the rift in feminism and the work that we need to do that's about fixing feminism, we tend to look at the world as black and white, right? We tend to say the feminist movement has been long led by white women, and it's now time to make room for some black women in leadership, as if there are no brown women who are part of the feminist movement who also experience racism, as if there are no Asian women who are at the front lines and have long fought on behalf of both black women and white women. And so I would love to engage you in this conversation of where are you right now in this moment, reacting to anything that you've heard, but also speaking from a lens that is African. I know you're Egyptian, but not necessarily black the way that I'm black, right? And not white either.
Right, thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Mona Eltahawy. My pronouns are she, her, and as always, fuck the patriarchy. That's how I begin and end everything. It's my sermon, thank you. Welcome to the mosque, church, temple of Mona, etc. I'm really happy to be with you all. Apologies for being so late, a few technical details and Zoom links on my end, but I'm very glad to be here. So hello everyone. I'm so glad that you asked me that question, because that's exactly how I feel right now. I feel like personally, I feel like I am straddling many revolutions, and I live for revolutions, and I live for rising up, and I live for upending kind of accepted and old ideas. So right now I am a feminist. I'm an Egyptian woman of Muslim descent who is brown, who has lived in the United States for the past 20 years. So my identities are all of those things. And I'm watching two revolutions happen that are incredibly exciting. One revolution, of course, is the Black-led revolution in the United States, which is wonderful, exciting, and is inspiring the entire world. And the other revolution that I'm watching with a great deal of excitement, and much like that first revolution, I've sat here and said, my God, finally, fucking finally, is a revolution of young Egyptian women. Women from mostly right now, wealthy women who are rising up, or privileged, educated women rising up against sexual assault and sexual violence. But that group of women also includes queer women, which for the first time I'm seeing come through. And what I'm seeing, and I think what is wonderful that connects all of that, is a lot of those young women in Egypt, much like many Egyptians, are watching the Black-led revolution in the United States. Some of them were too young to have taken part in the Egyptian revolution in 2011, but I'm seeing so many account names with Black Lives Matter in them. When I go to the bios, this is on social media, of course, I'm seeing them engage with the revolution, the Black-led revolution in the United States. And for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing Egyptians have this absolutely necessary and difficult conversation about anti-Black racism in Egypt, about colorism in Egypt, and about how all of these global uprisings can be connected. And that is the only way we're going to get through this global pandemic, because most of us who are privileged enough to be surviving through this pandemic, essentially locked up at home, we have to emerge out of this pandemic into a better world. And I see that better world happening now online between all of these factions that form my identities. And I think for me as an Egyptian, it's especially important that those young women are looking at anti-Black racism, colorism, and sexual violence together. Because if our revolutions, plural, stand a chance, they have to look at all of these really difficult things together. Because like Sisonke said, I am obsessed with the patriarchy. I wake up every morning saying, fuck you, patriarchy, I'm gonna kill you today. And I know that in my lifetime, that's highly unlikely, but hey, right? A woman can dream. So I will fucking kill you today, patriarchy. But patriarchy, like I tell people more and more now, is an octopus. And the head of that octopus is patriarchy. And each one of the 8 tentacles is one of the oppressions that we often define. We define patriarchy as a system of oppressions that privileges male dominance. And in lay term, I like people to imagine this octopus, and those oppressions are capitalism, white supremacy, sexism, homophobia, ableism, ageism, etc. And depending on where you live, you are strangled by 1 or 2 or perhaps all 8 of the tentacles. For us to emerge out of these various confinements that we're in right now, the pandemic is like a kind of a literary confinement, an actual confinement, a physical and deadly confinement, but to the confinement that has imprisoned us within all of these tentacles of the patriarchy, we have to emerge into a world where we're actively chopping off those tentacles. I'm sorry, octopus, you're a beautiful creature, but we really have to recognize the danger of that. So that's where I stand. And I also stand, as I said, on the cusp of a woman of Muslim descent. People see me and they don't see Islam because they expect they have certain markers. I'm not visibly Muslim. My mother is in hijab. My mother wears hijab. She lives in the United States. She's visibly Muslim. My sister wears hijab. My sister-in-law is a physician in the US. All of these 3 women who I love very much are visibly Muslim. And when they go out into the public space, they do contend with brown woman and visibly Muslim woman. So I'm balancing all of these, and the top of all of this for me is patriarchy, because that is the most universal of all of these, it runs all of these oppressions. And in my opinion, to fight racism, colorism, classism, all of that, misogyny, we have to tackle patriarchy, because within the Black-led revolution, we're seeing terrible stories like Toyin, you know, the young Black activist who was murdered after she went home. She went home. She was protesting for Black people to be safe from violence and brutality in a revolution that was triggered by the death of murder of a Black man by the police. And here is this Black woman who was murdered herself, you know? And the same in Egypt. But in Egypt, the complication now, before I wrap up, will have to be, if our revolution stands a chance, will this revolution against sexual violence, against patriarchy, take into account working class women, Nubian women, disabled women, Sudanese women who are in Egypt as refugees, women of all backgrounds, uneducated women who do not have an iPhone and have no access to Zoom or Twitter. So these are basically all the complications that I'm handling, but this is an incredible, incredible moment. Usually social upheaval follows a pandemic. When you look at the flu in 1918, 1919, in the last century, social upheavals followed it. We are now living in this incredible moment of revolutions during the pandemic. So we have to take this moment. I'm so sorry that so many people have died. My condolences to everyone who's lost someone dear to them. My beloved partner's father died. We have so many friends who have been affected by COVID, but let's seize this moment and make these revolutions work by demanding a better world on the other side of this.
Yes, we absolutely love all your statements. And Mona, thank you for bringing that to the forefront. When Mahohodi and I put together our first virtual festival, which was about COVID versus inequality, we talked at length about, you know, the same topics that you're discussing. And actually, Arundhati Roy, who will be our keynote speaker tonight, she wrote an essay in the Financial Times where she was talking exactly about, what we're living through as a portal. And just like you, I've also had, very personal impact with COVID. 2 of my aunts were hospitalized very seriously. Both are fine now, but it's been really scary, especially in my Dominican community in New York City. But one thing that I do want to talk about, and it would be great for us to talk very, very precisely. I think like our audience would benefit from precision, because sometimes we talk in these conversations, we have a tendency to talk in abstract terms that I think it makes it very difficult for everyday women to know, like, so what the hell do I do? So, we're both really big on like, let's really speak in plain English and let's talk about what it is. And so I'm really interested in going around one more time and let's talk about like, what is it that's holding us back? The things that we want to leave outside and not bring through the portal, what I see them as are obstacles to solidarity. And I want to like talk about really precisely about what are those obstacles to solidarity, because Mona, what you're talking about is a system that thrives on stopping solidarity, on making us feel disconnected, and on creating, these identities that make us believe we're very, very different from each other. So it would be great for us to talk really about, like, in your own experience, how you see this idea playing out. So, and I'm gonna ask Sisonke if you can start.
Nice job. She's like, I'm not having it.
I get awake because it's midnight. So I feel like if I don't stay on you, it's midnight in Australia for anyone who just joined us, and we're so touched and honored.
So, I mean, obviously, all of the isms that Mona has just described in the octopus, each tentacle in the octopus is an obstacle to solidarity. Capitalism functions to make us believe that we are units of labor that are in competition with one another rather than working cooperatively. Racism functions to make us believe that there actually is some kind of essential difference between us, in our DNA. And again, it serves the capitalist machine by making us compete against one another. So I think at root, it's the tentacle. So Mona has given us such a wonderful framework for thinking this through. At a personal level, I will say that what that boils down to when you're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis is a profound sense of mistrust. What racism does is it makes me question whether someone is on my side or not, right? And often as a Black woman, I have good reason to question whether or not someone is on my side. And as a white woman, often white women have not good reason, but they have been conditioned to be fearful, to read me in ways that have absolutely nothing to do with what my intentions may be or what it is that I'm actually capable of achieving. So I think the real, we often talk about, our queen, Toni Morrison, who's right behind your shoulder, Clavis, who talks about the very serious function of racism is to serve as a distraction. And I think it's really important to think about what that distraction looks like. It has many forms. I mean, that's why that phrase is so powerful, and we see it sort of used, it's almost become a meme. It's used in so many different ways. But one of the ways in which that phrase becomes important is for helping us to think about this idea of mistrust. As a Black woman, I am very mistrustful of many people because of the history. So an obstacle to solidarity, I think, is mistrust. I was in a conversation earlier today with an incredible group of women. I've had like 3 separate conversations today, 3 panels, so I'm exhausted. So if I start mixing up my topics, forgive me. But I was on this incredible panel. It was a woman from India, born in Kerala, a woman from Noongar country here in Western Australia, an Aboriginal woman, a woman from Pakistan who was moderating the panel, and then myself, and there was a 4th woman, but I'm tired and she's going to be angry at me if I don't remember. And in that panel discussion, what we spoke about was the idea of love. Mm-hmm. What does love look like between us? What does love look like? And one of the things that I think that often happens when we have conversations about solidarity is we talk about the political purpose of us getting together. You know, we're going to achieve this. And then if you don't do that, then, you know, I'm going to be angry, and then we'll be, you know, so, and that stuff is, you know, super important. But I think if we think about if we really seriously think about love, not in the namby-pamby, you know, love as a kind of sentimental, you know, we got to get along, but love in that toughest sense, a love that says, you're not going to disappear on me when I challenge you, right? A love that is relational, that says that when we ask one another as feminists tough questions, the answer is not what I learned today is called liar tears. You know what liar tears are? The liar tears are the tears that come quickly, too fast. Those are what you guys call white fragility, you know, white tears. White tears come too quickly. Those are fragile tears. I'm not interested in those. I'll tell you to go away if you come to me with fragile tears. But what is extremely important is that when you come back, because if I love you, I will stay there, and you will come back if you love me too. And then when we dig and we continue to work together, and you continue to move beyond the fragile tears that had me send you away, then you will see that when we hit the real tears, believe me, I will cry with you, because that will move me. So solidarity is about that kind of love that moves beyond the fragility tears, where we are moved by one another, and then we begin to deal with what is real.
I feel like that was a mic drop. Nobody can say anything.
Please don't have me go next. Please don't have me go next.
Killing us.
Oh,
that was
my
the last
God.
question. That was the last question of the day. Thank you very much for messing up the flow.
That was beautiful.
That was very beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very interested in hearing what Katie and Mona both want to say about what you see as obstacles to solidarity. Katie,
now, I will go. I will say that I can speak from something that I see consistently in my own line of work as a body acceptance activist and someone who works on the internet and someone who works in fashion. And one of the things that I started realizing was part of the patriarchy, and one of the and a tool that men have utilized for so long is to keep women infighting about our appearance and keep women insulting each other's bodies and belittling each other in these very shallow and physical ways, so that we don't notice what's going on. And that's just something that I keep trying to push in my Instagrammy way, that it's not about who wore it better. It's not about picking another person apart. It's not about I'm fat, she's thin. What is that? It's about moving together as women.
I have to tell you, the older I get, because I'm also on the other side of 40, and you know, the older I get, like, I don't think I realized that when I was younger, like what a distraction appearance is. And I think anytime we try to talk about appearance as an obstacle to solidarity, you come across as like you're shallow, or you're not really talking about the serious problems as women. But even when we think about the fact that, like, if you don't have straight hair, people think you're messy or dirty, and like how much time and like terrible chemicals women have gone through to like make their hair straight, you know, from that all the way through, right? Bleaching skin, like eating disorders. I mean, the kinds of things that we put ourselves through because of this distraction, which to me, it's like really an important reason why I push a lot for like athleticism. I'm a runner, Mahojodi's a runner. And like, I think one of the things that we realize as women is that when you start being stronger and your body's doing for you what you needed to do, you don't pay as much attention to that other bullshit. You're like, I don't care so much what my hair looks like. I'm not so concerned about being a size 2. And so to me, like, it is revolutionary to say, I love my body just the way it is. And, you know, I thank you for saying that, because I feel like we don't talk about that enough as women, you know, which is.
And it's not, can I just say something else? It's not that you don't have a point of view in fashion, a style, or an aesthetic. Every single one of us here looks amazing. And I think that is something that people get confused about. They're like, if I pay attention to my looks, then I'm on the wrong side, but that's not what it's about.
Right.
Yeah. Well, listen, we take pride. We take pride in looking cute. I mean, let me tell
everyone's
you.
looking very cute. Everyone's looking very cute.
We're saying we're still gonna look fabulous. Nobody's saying don't do it. But I also think it's important to realize when our appearance is being used. It's one of those tentacles, you know? So Mona, what do you want to say about what are the obstacles that get in our way of solidarity?
Okay, well, here's one obstacle that we need to just kind of push to the side. I'm 52 years old. I will be 53 at the end of the month. Enough of this shyness about age. 52. Woo!
Yeah, here for that.
No, okay, that is serious. I'm not going to say no seriously. That is serious. I love everything that's been said so far, and I agree, because these are all obstacles. And so I want to introduce another element, and I think it's this idea of scarcity and finite, like everything is finite, that there's only, and I call this the crumbs that patriarchy throws us. And I sit here and I come up with all these images exactly because, like you were saying, Clavis, at the beginning of this question, that so many of these things we talk about are just these things up here, and they're so distant from our day-to-day lives. So cake, who doesn't love cake? I love cake. So I'm portraying this as, it's not a cake. It's not like our lives and our opportunities and our being in the world, and not these cakes that patriarchy slices up and then gives us crumbs and then says, compete over these crumbs. That's not how it is. Because the number of times that I've been in work situations, and I've been a journalist for most of my working life, I don't do news reporting anymore, but that I've heard women in all fields, including my own, saying things like, I hate working with women. We just end up competing. I much prefer working with men. And that's a terrible, terrible thing. And that's because of the competitions, whether over appearance, whether over space, whether over opportunities, and that's because everything is controlled by patriarchy, and it's so difficult. And you're seeing now what's happening with, say, in the United States, where it's fantastic and wonderful that so far 2 Black women have been named as publishers, right? In these big publishing houses. But come on, 2, where it's fantastic and wonderful that this incredible cover of the gorgeous, incandescent Viola Davis on Vanity Fair was the first time ever that a picture was taken for the cover by a Black photographer. Are you fucking kidding me? Seriously, this Black photographer just suddenly came into being. They didn't exist before. So it's like we have to question all of these crumbs that are thrown to us, and then we're told, go and fight over these crumbs. And I'm like, fuck you, I don't want your crumbs. I want the whole cake, and not your cake either. I want my own cake. I am not going to compete over these crumbs or slices. So let's stop thinking of things as these kind of like finite, scarce items that we are just thrown, and then we just jump in there and police other women or fight with other women. No, look at the head of that octopus and fight with that, because there is plenty, there's enough money everywhere in the world. No one should be poor. There's enough food everywhere in the world. No one should go hungry. There are enough homes and apartments and empty places to live. No one should be unhoused or homeless. There is enough hospitals and healthcare. Nobody, especially in the United States, should go without healthcare. So let's stop allowing the powers that be, patriarchy, to convince us that there isn't enough. There is enough. And as an anarchist feminist, my goal in life, besides defining what anarchist feminism is, because that will take all fucking day, is to destroy these myths of scarcity and to destroy these oppressions that make us fight each other for the crumbs. Demand a cake. Demand your own cake and stop fighting over crumbs.
Yes, yes. And I love cake, like, a lot. So very big fan of what you're saying. You know, one of the things that I would love to hopefully impart to everybody who is on the call, because I know folks are swamped with all kinds of demands on their lives, right? These are really amazing superwomen, and they're juggling all kinds of responsibilities. What is it that somebody does And this can be just observations day to day in someone's life as you're going about your business. How do I take apart patriarchy and show up? Not just, honestly, I mean, Black Lives Matter is at the forefront of our minds right now, but there's classism we've spoken about here. There's gender-based violence that's about queer and trans people. There's colorism that we've spoken about. So the thing that's actually playing through my mind, and forgive me, is Lean In, and the book that Cheryl put out a few years ago. And I remember my own personal reaction to that was, this is a very interesting missed opportunity, right? There's an opportunity here for all these powerful women to enable other powerful women to look around them and wonder, who's missing in this conversation? What is not being said? Instead of, how do I empower myself even more with an even larger boardroom suite? Which also, I mean, we can spend time talking about what is often complicated when women take on positions of power and are not necessarily fighting for the feminist movement. But specific to this question, what I would love to get at is, how do we in our day-to-day get women to practice this muscle of love, Sisonke, what you said, showing up for others and looking around beyond yourself, beyond people who look like you? What is that?
I mean, that's feminism.
Practice feminism.
101.
I feel like that should be a t-shirt. Practice feminism. Don't just be feminist theory. Yeah. But I think that part of the problem is that there are very few incentives to do that if you exist within the framework of patriarchy, right? So patriarchy rewards those who use the system of competition and division to get ahead. Like that's the game. So the system isn't just, people often talk about, this, what's happening with COVID at the moment is that we realize that the system is broken. And I think what's more clear is that the system was not designed to work for us, right? So the system is working perfectly well because it continues to empower a small amount of people. So the problem is not a broken system. The problem is the system that functions for the few for whom it's always been, existed. It's always been there to serve. So I think how we deal with this question, how we move beyond the division, how we move into spaces of love, is by recognizing that there has to be a way to live outside the system. That is a way that is only going to help us to deal with the very existential threats that we are dealing with at this moment. So there is no way to live within the current mode and the current system while continuing to pollute, while continuing to throw plastic into the oceans. That this is not a sustainable way of living. And so ultimately, this is where we get back to the issue of these intersecting tentacles, this framework that Mona has given us, to deal with. I want to address, I never know how to do these things because I want to address the questions that are coming up on the side. So how do we do that? Is that something I should do now, or is that something that I should just leave and let the other people answer the question? Because I saw the Karen one and I thought that would be an interesting one to deal with.
Please jump in, go.
Okay, so I see the question that's being asked about the Karen meme, and the question is whether that just is a kind of play on the dumb blonde, old stereotype. And I think it's not, and I think it's really important to think carefully about what's happening with the Karen meme. The Karen meme is the logical conclusion of a series of analyses that I think have been in the ether for the last 5 years, which have really begun to help us to think about the way in which white women uphold patriarchy. All of us uphold patriarchy in some way or another. As me, as a heterosexual African woman, when I take particularly conservative views, when I look twice at the young woman who's walking in the room wearing a miniskirt, and I don't support her when others just go, I'm upholding patriarchy. So it's not special to white women. It's not like white women are the only people who uphold patriarchy. Women uphold patriarchy, particularly heterosexual women. So I think what's really important is for, in any conversations about race and racism, it's super important to de-escalate what it means to be racist. And what the Karen meme helps us to think about is the racism of white women. So I guess I would challenge this notion that it's simply about the dumb blonde. I think in some ways it's too easy to put it into that basket. I would want to unpack what is productive and useful and helpful about the Karen meme. So there may be ways in which it might fall into certain traps, but I'm not prepared to throw it away because it gets at something that that Black women have been critical of in white feminism for many, many years. And it gets at something that has been a danger to Black people in general for many, many years. We know that the Karen is actually a modified, sanitized version of the woman who points at Emmett Till and he gets lynched. That's the history of the Karen meme. And I think it's really important not to be dismissive of that, to understand what's being said in the moment that Karen gets invoked, so that we don't just put it into the basket of sexism. So we deal with the racial content of that meme. So I just wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind as we have our conversation.
Sisonke, I want to react because I think you're saying something so important about de-escalating our definition of racism. We're both South African and we come from this country where we kind of win the Olympics as far as racism goes, right? So people get very worked up when we talk about, or when we point something out that they've done that is, listen, this is kind of a racist thing that you've done. Not that you're a racist person, but can you talk a little bit about how folks can start approaching the smallest moments in their lives that may be racist, that may be upholding the patriarchy, that are not getting Emmett Till lynched? Because we have a tough time holding those two things simultaneously in our minds. And those two things are true at the same time. You can be disgusted by what happened to Emmett Till and the woman who said, yes, he whistled at me. And at the same time, you can be asking, I mean, just what you said, right? I could be asking somebody, can I touch your hair in an inappropriate way? Or I could be saying, but why was she wearing that skirt?
And again, like, I think that often what we've done in the language that we use, of late, in some ways the language is useful, other ways I worry about it. So when we talk about microaggressions, and then we say, when someone offers to touch your hair, that's a microaggression. And I think what's important about understanding why people get upset about that is because of the history of Black people as a cabinet of curiosities. You put us in the museum. Our hair is different. Your hair is not different. Our hair is different. So the frame is all wrong. That's what someone is reacting to when you want to touch their hair, is that your hair could never be the one touched because you're the norm, right? So that's just an aside. I think the question of de-escalating racism is super important. I tell my white husband all the time that he's racist. I think it's really important for us to be able to engage in those questions. And when he disagrees with me, he says that I'm being self-righteous. And this goes back to that. And so you need to also be able to be in a space of love, not romantic love. Not everyone's got to cross over to the other side. But what's important is to be able to be firm, respectful, and truthful. Right? And when I talk about respectful, I don't mean respectful in a respectability way. I mean respect in that very deep way that respects your humanity as another, right? That human humanity, right? So I think it is really important to be able to challenge people on their racism without throwing their humanity away. If I say that your behavior is racist, it does not mean that I'm throwing you in the trash as a human being. That's an outrageous idea. We love men, those of us who are heterosexual. We love our fathers, right? And they are trash often, right? But you know what I'm saying? So I think, as you say, Maho, this is a thing about being able to hold two things at the same time, and it's really useful to be able to de-escalate, to accept labels or to push back on them, but to do that from a space of truth rather than a space of defensiveness.
I wanted to ask a question in my own, because that's exactly, I think, what's not happening currently, especially on social media. There is no dialogue. There is the charge, and then the cancel, and then that's it. Yeah. There's no way to talk through it. And I think I struggle with that, and I don't know how to move forward with it.
I would just, sorry, Mona, I know I want to hear what you have to say to this, but I would just answer that very quickly by saying I would not talk about it on social media. I think social media is a fantastic place to learn. I think social media is a fantastic way to receive. I think if you're looking for a deeper engagement, you have to be creative and find other ways in which to engage. And forums like this is much better than a Twitter conversation. You will never be heard. You will never have the space to say more than that tweet character. Whereas now, I'm looking at you, I'm loving your too cute background. I'm
sorry about my background. I'm sorry about my background. It popped up.
If you stumble and make mistakes, I have a level of capacity to hear the context in which those mistakes have been made and think about whether I'm gonna expend my emotional labor or not in this exchange. Well, and that's always my right to also withdraw it, right? To withhold it because I don't feel like it. But there's more scope for that to happen. So the one thing of which I'm very happy is that I spent most of my life, most of my 46 years on this planet, I spent without social media, because I think that would have been a tough one.
Can I just add, because I think this is really important to say, we have very different people on the call, women, men as well, here and there. One of the things that I'm emphatic about is do not let somebody else shut you up. Nobody has the power to take away your voice unless you let them. And one of the things that I see constantly on social media in this very moment is basically bullying that is coming at people through the lens of, you're not saying this correctly, you're not Black enough, you're not woke enough, you're not ally enough, whatever that means. And I mean, my response to what you're asking, Katie, very seriously is to shut yourself up is to allow somebody else to take ownership of an issue that you say that you care about, right? And I'm with Sisonke all the way. There's also parameters, there's also boundaries. So just this past week, full disclosure, one of our partners who we're proud to work with is anthropology. Why are we proud to work with anthropology? Because we see an opportunity for growth, and we see an opportunity to partner in a way that holds them accountable, but also asks them to grow through and with love, right? Well, we got butchered all over social media for how could you do this? Oh my goodness, cancel anthropology, etc., etc. And what I think is important is being able to stand your ground, right? Especially when you're doing something from a place of values. But then number two, having some boundaries of, I'm not going to go into a full conversation with you when I can't even see your humanity on the other side. I mean, I'm trying to see your human, but you're not even offering me a name. I'm speaking to +123 on Instagram. What does that mean? Like, we're not having a real conversation. Mona, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm loving all of this. I mean, I'm learning and agreeing and nodding, and absolutely yes. I believe the question was on a day-to-day basis, the initial question to this section, right? On a day-to-day basis, how do we challenge patriarchy and its attendant tentacles of oppressions, right? Okay, here's another one of my, so I've come like, you know, the cooking shows where like, here's something I prepared earlier. So, here's something I prepared earlier. And I call it feminism in 3D. And because, you know, 3D, right? You think, 3D. So you're talking about, you know, all the different aspects. And those 3Ds are defy, disobey, and disrupt. Because I have a lot of young women, especially, and queer people. So I also identify as queer and not heteronormative. And so my audiences, my people, my friends, I hate the word followers. There's a lot of people who come and engage with me on social media. I'm not a prophet. I don't want this. I'm an anarchist. Fuck leadership and oppressions of any kind. But people who come to engage with me come from a variety of backgrounds. But I would say that it's mostly feminists and queer people. And the way that I find the best thing to do when they ask me, look, I say I can't protest, or especially if they're young and say they live in Egypt or other countries where it's impossible to protest now, or very conservative societies, or if they're queer, very homophobic societies, so they can't be who they are because their life is in danger. So, and they say, well, how can I do this then? I can't go on the street. I can't join the revolution. I can't say, fuck the patriarchy on the street, like, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So what do I do? So I say, you know, think of feminism in 3D and the defy, disobey, and disrupt. Try to find a way every day, as small as possible, to defy, to disobey, and disrupt. And it doesn't mean you go up to Donald Trump and say, you're a fascist fuck, which he is. Or, you know, you do all of that. What you do is, yes, imagine that Donald Trump is right there in your house, or whoever the fascist fuck is who leads your country, Sisi in, you know, Egypt. And find ways to defy, disobey, and disrupt those powers that are suffocating us, the tentacles, you know? So it could be you're with, you know, ostensible friends who say something terribly homophobic, and you just say, hey, what the fuck? No, you know? Or you know that, so you have a friend who is say in an abusive relationship. This just leave right now doesn't work. Ask instead, how can I be there for you? How can I be somebody that you can call on? You know, like I was told a story, for example, of a feminist I know in the UK who walked into, this is a beautiful story of just the day-to-day. Feminist I know in the UK walked into a coffee shop and saw a young woman reading one of my books. So she said to her, hey, Mona's a friend of mine. And they got talking and exchanged phone numbers. The young woman who's reading my book then contacted the older feminist, who is a social justice advocate, and she works with abused women, and she works, you know, with a multiplicity of ways to fuck the patriarchy. And this young woman who'd been reading the book wrote to the older woman, who's a friend of mine, when the pandemic, when the lockdown began, because like many women around the world, she was subjected to abuse at home. So there's intimate partner terrorism and there's abuse from parents. She was being subjected to parental abuse. So she wrote to this friend of mine and said, I need help. And this friend of mine managed to get her out of the house just in time before her parents were going to fly her out of the UK, denying her an education and denying her, this is an adult woman, you know? And my connection to this whole story isn't just my book, but they use the code word Mona, which I'm very honored and humbled by. So when it was like time to like get out and get her out, my friend told this young woman, if you just text Mona, I'm gonna get everything to place. I'm like, oh my God, wow. This is like some kind of like Mission Impossible thing that honors and humbles me deeply. But this is how women come through for each other, not just by texting Mona, but here's a friend of mine who saw a young woman reading a book. She engaged with her, she helped her. So whatever you have, always understand, because you know, privilege is also a word that goes above people's heads, right? What does privilege mean? How do we show up? How do we defy, disobey, and disrupt? Understand, because this also ties in with Sheryl Sandberg and the lean-in crowd, and you are absolutely right to demolish it, Clevis, when you were talking about it. Was it Clevis? I'm sorry if it wasn't.
You're good, you're good.
Oh, okay, sorry, I'm so sorry, yeah. So fuck the lean-in crowd, because it really was, what it was is, it was an exceptional kind of, the feminism that says as long as there's a few women in these exceptional positions, that means that patriarchy is over. So we're gonna name a few Black women to take leadership positions, racism is over. That's not how it works. How it works is this: try to imagine and envision the person who is most at the heart of those tentacles, and when they are free, we are all truly free. So like that young woman in the cafe, someone who's disabled, someone who's queer, someone who's trans, someone who's non-binary, all of those things. This moment right now reminds us that it has exacerbated inequalities and injustices. And there are communities that are affected much more disproportionately than others. So as much as each one of us is suffering in those various ways, micro or microaggressions, the defying, the disobeying, and the disrupting has to remember those who are most hurt, those strangled the most. That way, when we begin to build, we're not going from the top up here and saying everything is solved. We're looking down here and understanding that when that person is free, we all are free.
And I think that's so important. So thank you for just those 3 words. I feel like I'm gonna chant them in the morning with "fuck the patriarchy." Thank you, Mona. But one thing that I'll just remind everybody, because one thing that I think we sometimes take for granted is how like these small acts, daily acts of kindness and solidarity. I'm thinking about what Sisonke said earlier about just being curious. I mean, to me, like one of the things that really gets in our way of solidarity is that we don't always understand what oppression means to someone else. It's really difficult, you know? I mean, I know for me, as a hetero person, it wasn't until I got really to college and my best friend was a gay man, that I really understood what that oppression was. I mean, I thought I understood it, but it wasn't until I was intimately involved in a friendship with someone I love that I understood it. So to me, it's also really about that curiosity, which can go a long way because it is in opposition to the systemic way in which we're separated, you know? So I know we're a little over time. I think it was supposed to be an hour, right? That we had originally thought. And you guys are so riveting. But I want to make sure that before our worker bees have to get back to work, everybody's at home, so it's okay. The boss is not going to know. So I'm wondering if we can just go around, and I'm really curious about what each of you think your commitment is to racial equality going forward. I know for some of us, this is a lifelong fight. But I'm wondering, like, what does it look like in your own personal life? And what you think, like, the folks outside of what Mona just said in terms of, like, that beautiful 3D of practicing feminism, which I think applies to everybody, whether you're male, female, non-gender conforming, whatever it is. But I'm just wondering in a more personal way, what does solidarity look like for each of you?
And can I add a little tag there? By the way, Becca says, I'd be totally okay to keep going, us too, but we want to respect everyone's time too. It's also midnight. At this point, it's way past midnight in Australia, so we gotta let Sisonke sleep. As you're answering Clevis's invitation, could you please also share with our audience the books that you've put out, how people can support you? I know you're creating fabulous and the best ever branding and just fun, playful things at Megababe. So could you please also let people know what you've put out, how we can support you? Thank you.
Again, I'll start with, I don't deserve to be on this panel. And I've been taking notes this entire time because I can't even understand. You are all so brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Not gonna cry with my white tears, but I'm just telling you, I'm so inspired. Anyway, I will tell you that one of the things that I have noticed, and the topic is so big that I've been very overwhelmed. And so I've decided in my own little corner of my small business world, Megababe is my business. While we seem big because we're at Target and all these giant stores, we are still self-funded, small, and it's me and my sister and my best friend. So I have decided to help mentor Black female business owners because I realize the privilege and access that I have just being a white woman to things that that many Black women business owners do not even know what they don't know to ask. So I've put myself out there to mentor. So that's what I'm trying to do, is bring Black female-owned businesses with me where I can. That is a concrete thing that I can do in my own life, and help amplify, obviously, the messages of women like you. I know you probably don't love social media, as you said, but I can get people I can bring eyeballs to you so that they can benefit from your teaching. That's it. That's all.
And remind us how everyone can get in touch with you and your work, Katie, because we love you.
You guys, I literally am like, can I get this as a license plate? Like, can you put "fuck the patriarchy" on a FKT? Like, I don't know how to. Okay, you can follow me at Katie Sturino on Instagram or at Megababe.
Okay, thank you. Let's go with Mona. You want to go next?
Sure. So we're talking about how I personally support
yes.
or how I personally engage in anti-racist work and how others can support me.
Yes.
So I live on social media, and I love social media for all its ugliness. It also has some really, really important aspects to it, and I speak about it often in other places. I won't go on and on about it here. But one of the things that I do on social media is, because I do have a very large platform, is that I try my best to amplify those who don't have a platform, and to also act as a connector on my social media, Twitter and Instagram, but also through my work. So the two parts of this question kind of spill over into each other, because I've written 2 books. One is called Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. I'm about to write part 2 now, The Sexual Revolution Begins. And I wrote a second book that came out last year, which is called, so Headscarves and Hymens looks at patriarchy in the Middle East and North Africa, quote unquote. And my second book, which came out last year, is called The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. And that looks at patriarchy around the world. And one of the things that I've done in both books is that I mention as many feminist activists as possible, historically and also contemporary. And feminist activists who are not white American feminists, and feminist activists who are not just American, because the United States is not the center of the universe, and the United States did not invent feminism, and the United States does not have a copyright over feminism. So in order to say fuck all of that, and to insist that people learn and understand about feminism across the world, I've included in both of my books as many feminists as, whether it's Stella Nyanzi in Uganda, or Amina Wadood, an Islamic feminist who is a Black American woman imam, or historical feminists in Egypt and in Morocco, just by way of showing that feminism did not just show up, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, and we did not need, and Gloria Steinem is a friend of mine, but we did not need Gloria Steinem to come to Egypt and bestow feminism upon us, but just to show all the connections between feminism. And the other way that I try my best also to work, especially when it comes through a specifically racial lens, because as I said, all of the women I mention are mostly women of color, because I'm very insistent on my book that feminism has to be led by the non-white, the non-rich, and the queer. And so when it comes to women of color, and specifically Black women, I try to engage in conversations like this that are mostly women of color and Black women, where I'm not the only non-white person. I'm done with being the only non-white person, because like Sisonke said, whiteness is not the norm and whiteness is not the default, so that then you can point to me and say, Mona, represent Egypt, Islam, brownness, the universe, Mars, Venus, and what, meanwhile white people just sit there and just exist, I exist in all my complexity. So that's what I do. I complicate, I make sure that people understand that there is a world out there, and it's much, much bigger than whiteness and the United States of America. And you can support me by reading my books. You don't have to buy them if I know that times are tough. But if you want to buy them, I've mentioned their names. And if you have money that you would like to support me with, I have a Patreon. And the reason I started the Patreon is because I want to be completely independent of the so-called mainstream media. I used to write for big publications. I no longer want to. So I have a Patreon, and you can look me up online. Thank you, and love and solidarity to everybody.
Thank you.
And your books are on Audible too.
That's right, Katie. Yes.
Yeah.
So for those of you who might get tired, you can put your ears to work.
And I read the book, so you can imagine I'm reading like this. I'll be jumping out of your ears.
I love it. Sisonke, what are your remarks?
I think very similar to Mona. I think that my work is I'm a writer, and I write because I'm really always been deeply interested in challenging narratives about who we are and what we're interested in, and that means, so my first book was Always Another Country, and that's really a book that seeks to spotlight the stories of 3 little girls who lived in the shadow of apartheid, and I wanted to tell a story about African leadership that wasn't about Nelson Mandela or John Cecil Rhodes. The idea that these big men are not the ones who define history, it's us. And so I think I want to, I'll continue to do that. I think the other one to lead it, to kind of pick up on Magagodi's question about privilege, I think one of my commitments and one of the ways in which I try to challenge myself is to living in Australia and thinking about the structural challenges that face Indigenous women in this country, the fact that 437 Indigenous people have been killed in custody over the last 10 years, and not a single person has been sentenced for those crimes. So 437 murders and no perpetrators is a very interesting statistic. And so for me, wherever I go, I want to continue to kind of highlight solidarity means recognizing that Black people are everywhere, that racism is global, and that it manifests in pretty much the same ways everywhere it is. And so we have to continue to shine the spotlight. African Americans have such an incredible platform, and it would be wonderful if they were able to turn that spotlight towards Blackness everywhere, understanding fully that we are in such solidarity with them. So thank you, everybody, for this incredible conversation.
Thank you. Mahodi and I, because our sisterhood, we just celebrated our 1 year of meeting and friendship, and we're like going strong.
You guys have been best for years.
I know, that's when the sisterhood is real.
Love at first sight, baby. Love at first sight.
But the one thing that I have to say about this love that we feel for each other and the revolution that we're trying to start through this movement, where like festival by festival, we're looking at these inequalities and bringing people together to help us think through how to solve problems, is the idea that like it's only in solidarity that we can change things. And the quicker we realize, men and women, like all of us together, I like I said before, I keep saying this, I think the identity that have been created have been used as barriers to keep us from understanding the power that we have to overthrow the whole thing. And so to me, it's just really important. And I appreciate everyone staying this long with us in this conversation. I could listen to the 3 of you talk all day, all night. I'm with the rest of the audience in saying thank you for your wonderful minds and your kindness and generosity. We'd really appreciate you helping us to think through these problems.
Yeah. I just want to echo what Clevis has said, and what I heard in this conversation is such a coming from a deep place of love and seeing one another fully is probably the best that we can do, both as feminists and as anti-racists. Everything all these astounding panelists has shared, to me, when I hear what you're doing, it sounds to me as though you're looking around, you're trying to elevate the position of the least among us, and that's something all of us can do. And you're not letting yourself be silenced, to Katie's question. And that's something, again, everybody on this call, you know how to do that. You know when you are cowering from a conversation because it's uncomfortable, or because you are being bullied, and it takes courage to stand up to a bully. So those are some things we can all practice, that muscle. We are so thrilled that these beautiful, they're hot as fuck, right? Women, and they're brilliant, came on board, said yes without hesitation. Look at Clevis. Yes, all day. Thank you so much, Sisonke, and our beautiful panelists, Katie and Mona. We love you. We're here to support you always in your work. And tonight we ask everybody to please tune in at 8 p.m. We are speaking with none other but, say it, Clevis.
Arundhati Roy.
Arundhati Roy, okay? All right, that's happening tonight at 8 p.m. So we'll see your fabulous faces then. Thank you. We love you. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good day.